Thanks again for the very kind introduction and for inviting me to start this series. It's a pleasure to be part of the community today that will start this exciting program for European athletics. So the aim of today's talk is to cover this topic, to speak about how youth progress to senior performance and how we can understand a bit more about the career performance trajectories and what it actually means. So the first thing that we want to do is to, if you go to menti.com with your device, a mobile phone or an iPad or another browser on your computer, and enter the following code, we will answer this question. So this is the website that you should be able to see. And if you enter the code 987779, you can start answering this question on Mentimeter. This is just for me to understand what's the audience, what might be the interest, what you do, and so we understand a bit more on who's on this talk today. So take your time to answer these questions, and we will see and understand more about the community. Okay, this will take a few minutes, but we seem to have a large contingent of coaches online this afternoon, sports scientists, athletes, administrators, sports medicine therapists, and other people involved with athletics, but the large percentage of attendees is coaches. So just continue voting, and I will change the share. I will continue with the presentation, so I now know more about the audience. Okay, so first of all, I would like to acknowledge a number of people that worked on many of the data that you will see in this presentation, so I prefer to do that at the beginning. In particular, the group from Italy, Gennaro Boccia, Paolo Brusti, and Paolo Moise. We've done quite a lot of work in the last few years on analyzing and understanding career performance trajectories of elite performers. So the data you will see in this presentation come from the work that this group has been doing. And there are other colleagues in Italy as well. Just for space, I'm not listing every single person. And also some of the work that was conducted in Aspire Academy. You will see some of the data from James Baker's group, athletics group, and Daniel Silvan, which is one of the speakers as well of the series on injuries, and Erik Halversen-Wick, which is a PhD student at Asperger program. So you will see some of the data from them. So it's just acknowledging the huge contribution of all these people. It's impossible to do the work alone. I'm fortunate to have a lot of colleagues around the world I work with. So let's get into the topic. The first thing I think that we all heard and we kind of agree, I guess, is that youth athletes are not mini adults. We hear this all the time, but I'm not sure if in the athletics community we understand it very well. But what should we consider about youth athletes? So first of all, we should understand that youth athlete development is very unique. It's a constantly changing affair. And there are constant and undulating changes in physical growth, biological maturation, and behavioral development. So describing an athlete evolution from youth to senior, it's a complex thing. It's non-linear progress, and everyone develops in different ways. But the knowledge of development stages is absolute key to provide appropriate coaching strategies. And finally, it's very important to understand, and I hope this talk will help with that, it's important to understand that success at very early stage of an athletic career does not guarantee success at senior level. And that has huge implications for the health and the the duration of an athlete in an athletic career, but also for the amount of expectations that sometimes are put on very young performers. So I hope that today we will cover these areas very well, and you will get a better idea on how to address youth development in athletics. So the progression from the bottle to the medal is never linear, is made by a lot of factors, and it changes consistently. And the history of an athlete might be different from another one. What we need to make sure we understand is that winning at a very early stage might not be the way to identify and spot talent, and actually talents tend to develop probably later in their career. So we spoke about talent. It's important to define it. What is a talent? And a talent in sport is an individual whose athletic performances are superior to his peer group, is a person capable of reaching or has achieved consistent performances at top level. So every time we're looking for talents, we are looking for somebody that is better than others in the peer group. And this is the mistake that is always made at junior level or youth level. So somebody that is very successful at that level, of course, is identified as a talent, but history says that many of those talents then somehow don't make it at senior level, especially in athletics. So what do we do with training? We focus the training and development in different age groups. So in childhood, we focus on sports engagement. In early adolescence, we try to learn to train. During adolescence, it's training to train and beginning to train to compete. At junior level, it's about training to compete, and at senior level, it's training to win. So the journey is mapped in different ways in different national governing bodies. Everybody tries to do slightly different things, but overall, this is the kind of journey that every athlete is on. And we've seen success also in the places I've been working with, where somebody very young comes into a sports academy, goes through the journey, and ends up winning a major medal at a continental event. So this journey is what most athletes go through. But athletics is a very interesting sport where athletes might enter at any step of that journey and actually go and succeed. And there is not large evidence that early specialization is a prerequisite for success at a later stage in their career. So a few things we need to keep in mind. Growth and maturation is one of the things we should consider when we're looking at athletes that develop. So maturity status is the status of the young athlete at the time of observation, and is measured with skeletal age or bone age. And the best way to measure it is by doing a hand X-ray. So on the right-hand side here, we see the hand X-rays of a 5 years old, of a 7 years old, of a 9 years old, 11 years old, 13 years old, and a 15 years old. And just by looking at the bones, it's possible, for example, to identify what is the skeletal age of this particular child. So this method is used to assess skeletal age. And then maturity timing is the age at peak height velocity. I will explain you in a few seconds what it means, or the age at menarche for women, for female athletes. And the peak height velocity and maturity offset can be measured and determined with anthropometry. So very simple measurements of height, leg length, and body weight using a specific equation. So if we want to assess the maturity level of a child, of a young athlete, and we have access to an X-ray, we can see their skeletal age and identify it. And there are nowadays automated softwares that can do that out of an X-ray. Or we can look at their growth over time, and we can determine the peak height velocity, which is the moment in their life where they grow the most in height. And for males and females, it's slightly delayed, but if we can have early maturers, we can have people that follow the normal growth patterns, and then we have individuals that are later maturers. And all of them show this kind of curves. So at some point they start growing very fast, they grow a lot, and then the growth rate reduces until they don't grow anymore. And this is an important aspect when we assess and evaluate youth performance. So why is this relevant? So Before boys and girls start to grow, we call this phase pre-peak height velocity. When they are close to reaching their peak height velocity, we call it circa peak height velocity. And then after that, it's post-peak height velocity. And we see many of those pictures, and anybody that works with young athletes around the age of 10 to 15 sees that. So many times in the same age group, we have boys that have the same chronological age, but they look physically completely different at one point in their development. And it's the same happening with girls. So these two girls have the same age, but clearly they have a different biological age. And these are data from James Baker's group, a group of athletics, children that are involved in athletics. Their chronological age, it's about 1.8 years different. Everyone is an individual here, and that's their chronological age in black. But if you actually measure their skeletal age with X-ray, you find out that there is an age difference in terms of the biology between them of more than 6.5 years. So when we are training and developing children, we should understand the differences between developing this child versus this child, despite the fact that they have the same age, and this girl versus this girl, despite the fact that they have the same age. So one way to assess them is to understand where they are in this journey and also where they might be in the skeletal age. And that's incredibly important when we assess their performances as well. Because of course, we would expect that this boy is probably going to be slower than this boy. Another important aspect to consider is the phenomenon of relative age effect. So the relative age effect is an uneven distribution of birth date that is favoring subjects born in the initial months of a selection year. And we know that in athletics, we do competitions based on year of birth. And what we expect and what we know is that somebody that is born at the beginning of the year, in the first quarter, it's a few months older than somebody that is born at the end of the year. And that has implications for growth and maturation, especially in the age range that we've seen before, that is crucial for peak height velocity. So most of the times, what we might find is that somebody that is born in the first quarter of the year of selection is faster, higher, stronger than somebody that is born in the fourth year of selection. And so I will show you some of the data on athletics to see if there is an effect of relative age effect. So athletics is a relatively simple sport. You need to be able to run, jump, or throw. And in multiple events, you need to be able to do these three things very, very well. So what do we know about physical abilities of youngsters? How do they develop? What we know is that children that are engaged in sport at any level, if they are physically active, by the effects of growth and maturation, they increase lean body mass. That's true for boys and girls. And they start increasing lean body mass a few years before they reach peak height velocity, and then they reach peak a few years after they reach peak height velocity. They increase trunk lean mass, they increase arm lean mass, they increase legs lean mass. So what we know is that their muscles become bigger as they grow. What we also know is that if we measure some physical abilities like the standing broad jump, the hand grip strength, the bent arm hang, they all get stronger with age, from age 9 to age 17. And actually, it doesn't matter if you are very weak or very strong at the beginning. This is the 10th percentile, the 50th percentile, the 90th percentile. So if you're weak or if you're very strong at age 9, you still improve in your performance to a certain extent. Of course, if your genetic characteristics are that you're very, very weak, your progression will never be as good as somebody that is very, very strong, but you will progress in those physical abilities. And the other thing that we know is also that endurance capacity improves with age. From age 6 to age 17, 18, it's impossible to improve overall capacity both in boys and in girls. It tends to plateau later on. And these are kids that are engaged in general physical activity, not specialized training. So we know full well that kids can develop. And it's the same for physical abilities like sprinting, but also for cognitive abilities like playing chess. So if we look at the analysis of the top 100 in the world in sprinting events, you can see that from age 15 you can improve up to age probably 25, and then there is a slight decline when we analyze the overall population. There are, of course, cases of people that become a little bit faster later on, but those are individuals. And if we track the top 10 in any particular event, you see that somebody develops at a rate that is completely different from someone else. And it's the same for chess. If we look at cognitive abilities, there is a rapid increase in cognitive abilities, and then it kind of goes down. So what we know is that we should expect children engaged in athletics to improve their personal best up to a point, and then after that point, probably improvements become a bit more challenging. And we've seen that in physical tests in Aspire Academy over the years. This is the candle movement jump average in the whole of the population of Aspire. And year on year, the average improvement is about 2.74 centimeters. So they grow, they get faster, they jump higher, and the same is with speed measured over gait timing. And if you measure endurance athletes, what you see is that their lactate threshold improves with growth. So this is the lactate threshold you measure age 14, this is the lactate threshold measured at age 15, and this is the lactate threshold measured at age 17. So you see a big change in physical abilities if children are engaged with training. What is now important to understand is that the rate of development, it's a very important aspect to assess. So when you are assessing young athletes, just assessing their performance in some of the tests might not tell you where they're gonna head. So in this example, again, from data from Aspire, in football players, for example, we have boys that have a very similar characteristics age 12, between 12 and 13 years of age. So they have the same similar height and weight, they have similar maturation characteristics, similar endurance and sprinting capacities, but they go on and develop completely differently. Actually, this boy looks like he's not getting better at age 13, and then suddenly he improves in candle movement jump much more than a boy that looked much better earlier. And if we look at the sprinting speed, these are three boys that are very similar, again, between age 12 and 13, and then suddenly they develop a completely different pace as time goes. And it's the same for endurance capacity, and it's the same for, maximal sprinting speed and endurance capacity. So what this is telling us is that you athletes develop a different pace. So if you're trying to identify a talent between the age 12 to 15, it's very difficult to do it. And actually tracking the physical development helps in providing appropriate training prescriptions. You should be aware of how they are developing in order to change and personalize their training. And also tracking performance is fundamental in athletics to avoid deselection and make sure you nurture the athletes with the best potential. Because you might put a lot of effort in somebody that looks very good at age 14, 15, and actually they might not progress. But we will see more about this in a second. So what does it mean to do performance tracking? First, with results now becoming available online, it's a lot easier to have access to large data sets. Before, all the results were in paper format somewhere. It was very difficult to find out how you could compare your athletes to someone else. Now there are large databases that allow you to analyze how things are going in the world at continental level, at national level, and regional trends. That can help providing predictive abilities as well as the possibility to benchmark typical developments. And some have introduced the concept of performance funnels. First, Kevin Ancrom in athletics, and then some national governing bodies and federations did it later on. So performance tracking allows you to assess if your athlete's progression is normal or is better or worse than a specific cohort. You can use it to analyze the potential of your system, of your group of athletes, or your nation and individuals within the system. You can also analyze world, continental, and national trends and help you check your competitiveness. You can understand where you are on the world stage or continental, national, regional stage. Many federations are now using this to decide on funding, selection, and deselection. but also can be used and has been shown to be quite an interesting approach to assess abnormal performances potentially affected by doping, or a kind of reduction in performances affected by injuries or judges, facilities, etc. So this is something that is growing. It's in the realm of big data now, and is definitely something interesting for us to use. So by using this approach, what we've seen so far. So this is work from Paolo Brustio and collaborators. What they did was they analyzed 39,590 athletes ranked in the IAAF top 100 official list between 2007 and 2018 at age under 18, under 20, and senior categories. And what they looked at is how many of them were born at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year. And what they found is that at under 18 level, both boys and girls, and under 20 level, both boys and girls, there's a huge amount of athletes that are in the top 100 that were born in the first quarter of the year. And this kind of effect disappears later on. The odds of somebody being born at the beginning of the year to perform well at senior level kind of disappear, which means that there is a relative age effect in athletics and is very prevalent, especially at under 18 and under 20 performance, which means that most probably the athletes that are reaching that level at that age are probably people that mature very early and are already matured and are more mature than the rest of the cohort. But the effect of maturation disappears when athletes reach the senior level. What's the peak age of performance? We've seen from Thomas Haugen that analyzed, again, the top 100 in the world in different events. And we know that athletes can reach the top level by age 25 to 27, but in some events like middle distances and throws, this tends to happen a little bit later. And what they've seen is that there is a slight difference between men and women, and there's a slight difference between the athletes that reach the top 10 versus the top 11 to 100. But the most interesting thing with this paper was the rate of progression, the annual change in percentage of the PBs of all these athletes. And you can see that athletes keep progressing and getting better up until a specific age in all disciplines, where they then get worse. And this information can give you already some reference data of how much you should expect improvement in performance, what should be the percentage improvement in performance that typically you see in the top 10 or in the top 100 in the world from age 20 onwards. And it's the same again with women, pretty similar progression that we've seen in this paper. And the other thing that we've seen is that in throwing events, there seems to be more time. Athletes tend to reach their peak later on for a variety of reasons. What about youth progression? So the paper that I showed before was dealing with the senior progression, and what happens with the junior progression. So this is a study from the Norwegian cohort, top 100 scores in Norwegian database. And what they showed is that in jumping and in running events, the maximum improvement in jumping events, it's about 48% from age 11 to age 18. So that's what they've seen in the top athletes. And in the girls, it's maximum about 24% in jumping performance. And then in running performances, in the 800 and in the 60 meters, the improvement from age 11 to age 18 is much less. So these data are already representative of the percentage improvement year on year that you see at every age group. And as you can see here, from age 17 to 18, already the margins for progression in PBs, in Norwegian cohort, in the top 100, as they've been measured, it's incredibly tiny. So what this study showed is that the sex difference was from 5 to 18% in all the analyzed disciplines from age 11 to 18. But the relative annual performance development in females decreases through the age period, and in males, the annual relative performance development accelerates up to the age of 13. or 14 for jumping events. So we see a plateau at one point, and we have reference data of how things progress. What we did then, we looked at the Italian database, and our idea is, and has been confirmed by the data, is that there is a difference between the people that reach the top versus the people that don't reach the top. And we thought that other than the result per se, the most important aspect to understand was the development in performance year on year. So we analyzed a few thousand records of the Italian database. And what we found was that in particular ages, the difference between the athletes that reached the top versus the athletes that didn't reach the top in men and women tends to be the rate of development year on year. So the actual measure or distance or time the athletes do at a very young age, it's not the most important indicator of their chance to perform well as seniors, but it's actually the rate of progression that tells you where they are. Also because what we found was a small percentage of athletes that were top as junior became top as seniors. So only 40% of athletes that were considered top at age 17 became top as seniors. And only 2% of the athletes that were top at 13 became top as seniors in the men high jump in the Italian cohort. In the men long jump, it's pretty much the same. Only 14% of the top athletes that were top at 15 became top at senior level. But in the women, we saw a slightly different thing. So 59% of the women that were top at 16 and 17 in Italy then reached the top as seniors, and 36% that were at 17 in long jump then reached the top as seniors. So this is already telling us a few things, that the actual measure and performance at junior level is not a predictor of success at senior level. And one of the most important things to look at is the rate of progression. And in fact, what we saw was that if we wanted to predict the personal best, the best way to predict it was to use the performance plus the annual change. And by age 18, we should be in a position to have a pretty good idea of where the athlete is progressing. That is much better than just having the performance result to determine their progression. So having a lot of data can help you also do some prediction. And the realistic expectations refer about this phenomenon that we've seen many times. So the percentage of top-level adult athletes that were considered top level when they were younger than 18 years old is very small. We've seen here that at age 14, 15, 16, again in the Italian database, only a very small percentage of athletes that were top at this age became top later on, and is the same with women. So predicting success from young age, it's very, very difficult. What about the UK data? So this is work from Phil Kearney and from the Power of 10. First of all, strong relative age effect. So the top athletes in 13, 15, 17, and up until 20, they seem to be born in the first part of the year, in the first 2 quarters of the year. And this effect kind of levels off later on. But the most important aspect of this study was that very many athletes disappear at different stages of development, and very few reach the top as seniors. And in fact, most of the athletes that were top as seniors were completely unlisted as under 13 and under 15. So they were not on the radar at all. So it is very important to recognize that this phenomenon has now been observed analyzing the data sets of many nations. What we've done that is we started to look at the international level. So what we wanted to understand was how many that are very good, how many athletes that are good at under 18 progress to be top 50 athletes as seniors. So we analyzed about 5,981 athletes that were in the top 50 from 2000 to 2019. And what we looked at first at the relative age effect. You can see here that the ones that were top 50 only at age 18 were mostly born in the first part of the year, but the ones that were top 50 at senior, there was no age, no relative age effect. And this was exactly the same with women. So the relative age effect is evident also when we analyze world data. What we then looked at was the transition rate. So how many athletes that are good or in the top 50 at different age groups became good as seniors. And you can see that there is only a small percentage. And then the ones that were good as senior, where were they when they were at age 19, 18, 17? Very few of them were there. The most important data of this study are these ones. Look at the development when we divide the athletes that were in the top 50 only at under 18 of age, and they never made it as top 50 as seniors. They are better than their age group counterparts up until the age of 18. And then their development stops. It's in the high jump. We see the same in long jump. We see the same in triple jump. And we see the same in pole vault. And we see exactly the same with men and women. Whether the athletes that reach the top 50 as seniors, they might not look very good from age 16 to 18, but they improve quite a lot. And this is a consistent element in all the jumping events. In fact, only 8% of males and 60% of females top 50 ranked at the age of 16 managed to be included among the top 50 senior. We did exactly the same with sprinters, 4,924 athletes. On average, only 17% of the male athletes and 21% of the female athletes were in the top 50 rankings, both in under 18 and in the senior category. And here we also analyzed the differences between the athletes that were top in only 18, the athletes that were top 50 only 18 and senior, and the athletes that were top 50 only in senior. And if you see here, the big difference is when you measure them in performance, of course, the ones that became good only top 50 only in senior, they are nowhere near the performance of the others, but their rate of development is a lot better and they reach top 50, whether the ones that were top 50 only in 18 in sprinting events, they level off very, very quickly and they don't progress any longer. And this is the same for men and women. So being very good at only 18 years of age is not a good indicator. But the most important aspect is, again, the annual performance change. So look at the rate of change in performance in the 100 meters, in the 200 meters, and in the 400 meters. And the rate of change is always a lot better in athletes that become top 50 later. So this again suggests that measuring and quantifying the change in performance year on year and the rate of improvement is actually a good predictor, a better predictor of where the athlete is likely to end up. And finally, in throws, this is a study from Francesca Piacentini in 2014. They analyzed how many athletes that were into the World Junior Championships in Kingston, Grosseto, Beijing, Bigos in Moncton, then disappeared from the top ranking in 2012. And you see that quite a lot of athletes disappear. And of this cohort, 64 participants in any World Junior Championship, only 8 athletes won a medal at a World Championship or an Olympic game. So again, just being at the Junior World Championships and actually medaling at the Junior World Championships in throws events, which tends to be a sport where most people can be identified slightly earlier than other disciplines in athletics, still is not a predictor of performance at a senior level. And we did exactly the same that we've done with sprinters and jumpers with throws, analyzing the top 50 in the world from 2000 to 2019. And what we saw was that the transition rate at 16 and 18 years of age was only 6% and 12% in males and 16% and 24% in males. What we've seen, of course, is the same. The prevalence of athletes that were top ranked at 16 years of age and became top ranked as seniors, it's very small. It tends to be a bit higher with the females. And the top 50 seniors that were already top 50 as youngsters, it's incredibly small here, even if in females it's slightly higher. And what we saw again, especially in throwing events, is that the successful athletes that were successful at junior, they tend to be born in the first part of the year. And the ones that were successful only at senior, there doesn't seem to be a big difference between the birth date. So they're not born in the first part of the year. So what are the gender differences? So if we look at the difference between boys and girls and how they evolve, there is a large difference that tends to kind of accelerate around the age of 12 to 15 years of age, which matches peak height velocity. And it's the same in running events and in jumping events. And what's the reason for that is mostly testosterone. So if we plot the running difference between boys and girls, the jumping difference between boys and girls, and the swimming times difference between boys and girls, it matches quite well the evolution of testosterone. So it's the main difference, is the gender differentiation. That's what causes the biggest difference between boys and girls. And what really this brings into account is that when we evaluate the performance progression and career progression on male and female athletes, we should absolutely take into account maturation when we evaluate how an athlete is progressing. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. So what I want to make sure you understand is that I am not trying to say that you shouldn't win at junior and youth level because winning at youth and junior level doesn't guarantee success. What I'm saying is that for most people, for most individuals, replicating success from youth to junior to senior, it's incredibly difficult, but there are exceptions to the rule. We know full well about this boy that won the World Junior Championships when he was still youth, and then he confirmed as a World Junior and a World Champion and World Record holder later on. We know about Kevin Mayer, that was in the first place at the Youth World Championships and the Junior World Championships. Carolina Kluft was the first place at the Junior World Championships twice and did also the world record, multiple age group records. Mondo Duplantis, first place at Youth World Championships records, multiple age group world records. So these are exceptional individuals that managed to replicate that success. But we also have other individuals that matured later. So Jessica Ennis, 5th place at the Junior World Champs, and then 8th place at the Junior World Champs, was European Junior Champion in heptathlon, then went to become multiple medalist at senior level. And our very Hannah England here, 11th place at the World Junior Championships in Beijing 2006, and 2nd place at the World Championships in Daegu, with a big improvement from junior to senior. So again, things are possible. You don't write off people that might not win at youth and junior level or might not even be at the championships. These people might still produce performance, especially if you understand how they are progressing in their career. So why do we have a low transition rate? Why this phenomenon happens? We really don't know. At the moment, we only analyze the data. But few things we should consider and look at is maturation. Early maturers perform well as juniors, but can continue to progress when moving to seniors. I think this is the case many times. Sometimes if you used to win or dominate at junior level, maybe you struggle to perform as a senior in the first few years, and then you lose interest. We don't know how many stop because of injuries. There are very few training diaries of athletes from youth to senior, and we should do more to make them public and analyze the training and development of these athletes. There are issues with burnout, lack of funding, financial incentives, doping. We definitely need to do more to understand why so many athletes that are very successful as youth and juniors can't progress as seniors. And probably we should question how we train athletes at a very youth level or a senior level, and how we make sure that they can transition successfully to senior. One of the ideas is to look at the injury prevention. There are many studies on young athletics cohort. This is one of the first ever attempts on the cohort we had in Qatar. And what we found, for example, was that growth rates and skeletal maturation can be an injury risk factor, and in particular when the athletes are going through peak height velocity. So rapid growth in stature and leg length, younger skeletal age, and fast maturity tempo can be associated with increased risk of bone and growth plate injuries. We didn't find any effects of changes in body mass or BMI and trunk height, but it's one of the I think it's the first ever study on a youth athletic cohort that has been followed for a number of years. And also, young athletes get injured. You know, if they get engaged in athletics and they train every day, they do get injuries. They tend to get a lot of injuries in the lower limbs rather than in the upper limbs. It's muscle and joint injuries. They get injured in competitions. They have a high incidence in the jumps, and in particular with the stress fractures in this particular cohort. And the runners have a lot of overdose injuries, and in particular with bone stress when they are exposed to high volumes of training. So this whole phenomenon of understanding how young athletes develop needs to take into account the training load that the athletes are undergoing, but also what's their injury history and their injury pattern. And that probably can help us understand a bit more why some athletes progress more than others. So in summary, early success is not a prerequisite for success at adult age. So don't make the mistake of identifying somebody at a very early stage and predict their success or not success, because you cannot really predict success at a very early age. If you have the chance, you should assess the maturity status, because every result, every test, every assessment you do should be taking into account the maturity status of the athlete, and that should inform training and progression and how you work with them. What we really try to achieve as a sport is health and longevity in the sport. So this should always come before performance at a very young age. Training should be progressive, adequate, targeted. We should really develop multi-skills. The question is, do we really know how to train young athletes? Is that something that we should really look at now, in particular with athletes that come from different backgrounds and might not be used to free exercise or free training like previous generations used to do? We need to be aware of the injury patterns, what causes them, and we should reduce the risk of injury in young athletes, because that might be what stops them from progressing from success, from junior to youth to junior to senior. And biological developments of young athletes involve various aspects, also behavioral and psychological changes, which we haven't covered today, but they are the key for sport retention and development. And maybe sometimes we have athletes that don't progress simply because they are not developing those skills that might help them succeeding at very later on in their career rather than succeeding as juniors. So few things to keep in mind. There is a free reading resource accessible online, the Aspetar Medical Journal. We had a conference last year during the World Championships. We published all the papers and it's freely accessible online. There is a particular article on this topic. I will upload on the chat the links to all the papers that have been mentioned in this talk, so you can access them and click on them. Most of them are open access, so you will be able to read them. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and these are my contact details.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. If we leave those contact details up for a second, that will give everyone a chance to get them. But we've had some good questions come through. Do you want to have a look at them? Look at them now.
Yes.
I have one question for myself first, selfishly. I participated in the under-23 level competitions that European Athletics provide. How important do you think they are at sort of helping the progression of athletes and converting that junior success into senior success?
I think it's a great initiative. I think the under-23 is a brilliant idea, because it's what is missing, you know, in between the junior to senior transition. And in some events, like in the throws events, where the implement weight might change, that's actually a good. I think it's a great opportunity for athletes to develop. I think it's a great idea.
Do you think it would be advantageous to have on the world level as well?
I think so. I think it would be.
Okay, so if we move over to questions from the attendees, the first one we've got is about, do you think injuries are more or less likely pre or post peak height velocity? And if so, how would you combat that?
What we've seen in the cohort that we measured here, and again, it's, these are just data from here. It would be good to have more from other places. It tends to happen very close to peak height velocity or immediately after, because that's a time where the athlete is growing really, really, really quickly, and they might not have the ligaments and tendon structures to sustain workloads, but also they don't move as well as they used to move when you're changing length of the limbs. So what we kind of saw was that the critical time is when their limbs are growing. So if you can measure the height and sitting height and leg length, which is a very easy thing to do, anybody can do, and you see a growth rate of 3 to 4 centimeters, then that's a moment where you need to be very careful on the training load for these athletes.
So you would recommend an overall reduction in training load if someone was undergoing?
I would recommend that, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So the next question we've got is someone just asking, what performance tracking system do you recommend for kind of looking at this data?
I actually, you can build your own. Data freely available online. Sometimes I do that. I go into looking for data for a specific age, and we build that. But now with the papers that we showed, it's possible to see those data. It's publicly available, so you can see the rate of development of the top 100 in the world, and check your athletes. So I think it's possible to either build your own, or there are a few software solutions out there that you can probably buy.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is a very specific question from Sean Pickering. How do you factor in technical development or expertise? For example, in throws, physical development may not be as much of a limiting factor as technical development. We see great talents limited by poor technique. Pole vault and throws is a great example of that. Do you have any thoughts on those factors?
I totally agree. Actually, I think that's the reason why in throwers you see they reach the peak later on. And in throwers, you also have this biggest issue that apart from the javelin, in all the throwing events, the weight of the implement is changing. So from youth to juniors to seniors. And of course, there are technical adjustments that are necessary to do that. And, this is a fascinating thing to actually look at. Because many throwers that are very, very good at junior level, then they disappear when they move to a heavier implement. So I agree with Sean. It's definitely something to look at, because I think it's very important. And then, of course, in the case of pole vault, yes, absolutely, the good equipment is now crucial. We can say the same about running these days, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and the next question we have is, do you have any insight from the data you've used when looking at these young athletes to the senior athletes about whether the training has stayed the same within the population? Could it just be that some of the young athletes have stopped training due to personal reasons? You mentioned that later on in the presentation, but how much of effect do you think society or the rest of life has on this trend?
This is a great question, because we really don't know. What we only analyzed was what we can, which is the performance data that they do on the track. We actually have no idea about the history of the athletes, their training diaries, how mature they were, and all this kind of stuff. But I think it would be great to have more diaries of, Hannah, you have a great diary, you should publish it, of all your years of training. It would be good to actually know what athletes did, because I don't think we have a good literature of how to train young athletes. We all say there are not many adults and we shouldn't do too many things, but what is appropriate? We don't really know. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of trial and error, and actually documenting it would be good. My suspicion is that, having seen few youth and junior world championships, I see a lot of athletes that look very mature for their age, and they tend to succeed. And then a few years later, you don't see them. So I was actually thinking about your event in Beijing. I was in Beijing in 2006. We did that, and you finished 11th. The winner, Yelegat, won, and she never won anything at senior level.
Mhm.
And so this tends to happen many times, and we don't really know. My suspicion is a combination of factors, and we need to find out more about it.
Mhm. I think there's often a perception in sport that potentially they look mature because they've been overtrained. I think that you can say they've been training harder than ever. Obviously, the height can't be trained, but yeah. Do you think it's just a physical maturation difference, or also a potential overtraining difference?
It could be anything, it could be a physical maturation. Then there could be the fact that because you're very good and you're expected to win, probably you're going to be training more to try to win. And probably that's what causes then later on probably injuries or leveling off in performance. And then I think psychologically we underestimate maturation. So somebody might be way more mature than others mentally and be prepared for a major event, and then later on the effect disappear. And then the final thing for me is, I think if you are used to win a lot as a youth and then suddenly you move to senior and you never get on the podium for a few years, then it's quite daunting.
Mhm.
And probably then you give up because simply you can't cope with it.
No, there are many factors, and we've got a question from Bob saying, if you take all this into consideration, is it even worth working with a high achieving young athlete? Should you just ignore them and wait for senior success? And coupled with that, I would like to add a lot of the funding or support system is very results based for maybe kind of from 16 upwards. Do you think that does more harm than good?
Well, I wouldn't like to be the coach of the junior national team, that's for sure. Because, of course, if you are the coach of the junior national team, you're not going to take to a major event the ones that might win in 10 years' time. You're there to win. And this is always the issue. So I think if you are a very talented athlete that looks talented at the time, of course, you need to train them and develop them. What I'm trying to say with this talk and many times is don't overlook the others because they might surprise you. So never leave anybody behind because you don't know what they might do.
Yes, definitely. I think we've got a lot of coaches on the call, that's a good message for them to hear. The next question we've got is, if you had a youth or a junior athlete producing senior level performances, in your opinion, is it good to progress them to those senior competitions, or should they remain in their age group?
It's really difficult to give a blanket approach. In team sports, for example, some very young athletes sometimes are fielded. How many 18, 19 years old football players we see playing in the Premiership from time to time. So it's kind of an accepted practice. I think in athletics, you need to be aware of the fact that they might experience failure. And so it's about the individual, how you deal with it, how you prepare them for it, and what the expectations they have going in. But if they are mature enough to do that, it's been done in other sports, I can't see why not in athletics.
Interesting. Maybe that would be different if you had different hurdle heights or different implement weights. That's another factor in there as well. So we have a question from someone asking if there's any country you've studied that you think does this progression from junior to senior particularly well, or maybe badly if you want to name someone that's done it badly.
No, actually, this is a good point. We haven't looked at it yet. It's probably an idea to have a look. It'll be an interesting one to look at, but I don't know at the moment if there is somebody very good at transitioning junior to senior. What I know is that every country experiences big surprises. Sometimes athletes that are nowhere in the radar as junior just appear later on. And I think they happen by accident rather than by systematic approaches to nurture them.
Yes, maybe they have a coach that decides they're still worth progressing. Yeah, and it pays off. Okay, the next question we have is, what about junior athletes that come into athletics later, having competed in other sports? Does the high rate of changing between sports explain future success in athletics? Does the early lack of specialization translate to being better as a senior?
I think it really depends on the athletics discipline. So there are some that require highly technical, we were talking about throws before, there's high technical demands or hurdles. But I think you can come in later in an endurance event or a pure sprint. Adam Gemili was a footballer. He's quite fast. So I think early specialization is not necessary in athletics. If you have the physicality, that definitely helps. And then if you can learn in the technical events faster, then you can definitely develop. So of course, the high rate of change would be if you come in, you've never done anything, you will have a good rate of change. But if your measures times are decent and you are progressing faster, that means you've got a chance. And I have to say, sometimes probably is a good thing, because if you've been sprinting since age 12, then maybe you are a bit, you're a bit bored of it, and maybe you're a bit drained by the training you've been exposed. But if you've been doing all sorts of other sports and you're very fast, then maybe you can progress more. So we've seen it a few times. So I wouldn't say early specialization is the way forward.
Are you willing to commit to an age that you think specialization is appropriate?
I think the age where specialization is appropriate is when the athlete decides they want to do it for real. Mm-hmm. But we shouldn't force them. I think they should experience, even the throwers should experience other disciplines, because that would make them better athletes anyway. But then the moment they commit, it's when it's right. It's not when you as a coach, you decide, I think.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just do one more question because we have got to the hour. Just one question, which I think will be very relevant to coaches, but do you have any advice on how you would deal with a young athlete that has stagnated, that has stopped improving?
Yeah, this actually happens very, very often. You need to find out why they are stagnating, and sometimes it might be necessary for them to change coach just because they need a change in the way they are trained or the environment they are in. But it's a very difficult situation to deal with. It can be done to maturation. So again, if you know their maturation and how they are growing, that might help you understand why they're not progressing. But the ways to deal with sometimes is you have to change how you coach them. You have to try something different, because otherwise it's not working. Sometimes it's changing the environment of the coach. And sometimes that's just the reality. They're just not going to progress, and they have to accept it.
Okay, thank you, Marco. So thank you for everyone for taking part, submitting your questions, and listening along. We've had a few questions about how you can access any slides or recordings of this. When you registered for the High Performance webinar series, you may have ticked a box saying you're willing to be contacted by European Athletics about this topic going forward. That will be where information will be shared to access the recordings of this and the rest of the series. If you didn't do that and you're concerned, Yannick is going to put his email address in the chat. He's the person to email if you would like to access any recordings or any further information. So just looking forward, our next webinar is next Friday, October the 16th, at the same time as we've met today. We hope you come and join us there. We've got Sebastian Rassenaire presenting on elite athlete health and performance in the heat. So hopefully that's going to be of interest to some of you guys, and I hope you've enjoyed today.